What is the future of mental health? This question was discussed by 65 leaders from 8 different countries during Dublin Dialogues in June 2014. Here are some voices from participating leaders to stimulate your thinking.
I find that the label, the psychiatric label and the label of patient, the label of consumer, we need to throw those out the window. We need to talk about the fact that we all have aspirations and that at some point we all start from the same place in life, and that service providers are the systems, the institutions, those silos that are out there kind of responding to people's needs are inadequate because we've kind of wired them the wrong way. I also believe that when you look at people living with a mental health condition as citizens, you're actually taking the stigma away. And you are then, the response for the service provider should be, how can we best meet the complex needs of this citizen, this individual who's before us today? Recognizing that those needs may shift over time, but that is only, those needs are only one dimension of what that person brings to the table. And it creates a very different, it equalizes the playing, the field, the relationship between the service provider and the person, because all of a sudden you're equal. I'm serving a citizen who is equal to me, has the equal rights to me. So I feel like it's a fundamental paradigm shift. At some level, we have to recognize that the systems, the institutions, the structures, even the legislation that we have, they were all wired by design. Some of us in this room even came up with those models, came up with those responses to issues. We need to reconcile with the fact that they are grossly inadequate in actually responding to the needs of vulnerable, marginalized people, and even society as a whole. And if I had the power, I would blow them up. I would blow it up, and I would actually start redesigning the whole system to become much more responsive. We wouldn't be talking about hospital beds and doctors and nurses as much as we are, because we'd actually be investing in healthy community, vibrant cities, communities, and we'd actually be investing in the front end instead of the back end of these really complex systems. And I think what happens because of the politics, how everything is kind of tied to political mandates, we actually never get to real change. The best we do with these complex systems is tweak them. We call it reform, and then we go on to the next report and the next election, and we actually never do justice to what we need to do to respond to the real needs, the authentic needs of our citizenry in the globe.
Essentially, I was making the point that we can't forget about the past in terms of what we learned from mental illness. And I started off by talking about treating some forms of mental illness, i.e. general paralysis of the insane, with antibiotics. And if we hadn't have understood the cause of that particular illness, we would not have been able to apply that treatment. There's examples all the way across medicine, which I won't go into now. But in this context, I was making the point that it's part of the discussion about the future of mental health services must also be about what neuroscience is teaching us and what the capabilities are. We were asked to look at the future, so of course I speculated as to what might happen in the future. And unfortunately, even though I emphasized about the interaction and a dialogue between the many people in the audience who responded afterwards were still, unfortunately, quite polemic and were making the point that they needed to throw out this particular baby and start all over again, which I think makes no sense. Equally well, the second speaker in the session talked about social determinants, and yet the mechanism whereby some of those social determinants, such as stress, environmental problems, pollution, etc., can affect mental health and physical health, are beginning to be better understood. So again, it makes no sense just to blow it all up and start all over again. We need to learn from across the board, across the range of expertise that's there, from social, from recovery-based, from community-based, from biology, from medicine, and from neuroscience. We can't be polemic, we can't be ideological. We have to move forward rationally and scientifically and with evidence-based as to what works best, how things can be improved and how they can continue to be improved. And that involves a dialogue between, in my view, neuroscience, sociology, epidemiology, and other professions.
Followers are looking for leaders who lead, and looking for the champions, people who demonstrate these core values in their work. So that's number one. Number two, I would encourage that leaders who are effective take risks, and that people need to stand up, speak out for these core values. Those are the ones who ultimately have the courage to take those risks and lead. And third is the importance of persistence and the need for to look at this as a long-term issue. We're talking about moving into the future, and that change sometimes is a slow process, but the need to keep your eye on the prize, so to speak, to continue to foster these principles on an ongoing basis.
Framtiden innebär väldigt mycket förändringar. Snabb förändring, mycket information. Vi kommer att ha många olika problem som vi behöver möta. Vi har en ökad psykisk ohälsa, vi har en höjd ambitionsnivå och människor vill ha hjälp på ett individuellt sätt samtidigt som vi behöver kombinera den individualistiska hjälpen med ett helt samhällssystem som behöver främja psykisk hälsa. Och det betyder att ledarskapet är väldigt viktigt framöver. Vi kommer att behöva bra ledare som både kan se till att vi har en riktigt bra produktion. Samtidigt behöver vi också uppfinna ny kunskap, nya metoder. Vi behöver utvärdera och forska så att vi skaffar oss ny kunskap. De här två spåren kräver helt olika ledarskap, tror jag. Om vi inte gör det här ordentligt, då slarvar vi bort det mentala kapital som vi har. I framtiden så är det idéer, det är människors tankar, arbetssätt som är det viktiga. Det är också risk att vi sliter ut oss och på det sättet skapar ny psykisk ohälsa genom att vi inte på ett bra sätt lär oss att hantera alla nya tekniska framgångar och utmaningar som samhället har.
I think right now the impact on mental health is not as positive as it can be. For example, with preschools, children with emotional and behavioral difficulties as early as age 3 are being expelled and suspended from those schools. And then in smaller communities, there aren't very many options for those children. And that type of action taking against the child, I think, has a lasting impact on that child's own self-image and sense and value of themselves. So I think that has the negative potential for that child that could carry on into their other school years and into other settings. What I would like to do is to have, in the public schools, for example, is to change and improve the culture and the environment of the schools. There are proven practices that have demonstrated very effective environmental changes in a school that have not only enhanced the teaching staff's feelings about teaching and their sense of well-being, but also it has demonstrated that the students' performances improve, and students are not only more positive with the staff in the school, but they're also much more positive with each other. So I think if we can start with the culture and the climate and changing and improving that, that would be a very important first step.
The program that I was speaking about this morning in the Dublin Dialogues was related to workplace mental health. And in Canada, a little over a year ago, We released a report that we have done that has now culminated into a standard on addressing psychological safety in the workplace. And there was a great deal of interest in that from other countries, as we have been experiencing over the past year, because it is seen as a way in which to address a multitude of different issues related to mental health. Our workplaces is the place we spend most of our waking hours, and it is something that we take great pride in, yet it's a huge source of angst and anxiety by times. And so it's addressing ways in which to reduce that in order to prevent mental health problems from developing in the first place. The other issue is we have a geographic that doesn't work because of severe and persistent mental health problems. They've never been in the workplace, and yet it's something that defines all of us in many ways, and a large group of people never get to experience that. So another issue we were talking about was the aspiring workforce. What can be done to get people that can and should be working? And so the Aspiring Workforce report from Canada is another area of interest, and talks about promising and leading practices in Canada, along with recommendations that will help people who want and need to work to be able to do so.
The core of that for me is that in our pursuit to develop better services and to move forward, we would need to sort of stop, go back and correct the past, in the sense that we still, in a lot of countries, especially here, are still working within initiatives that were started 10, 20 years ago that we have still never been able to complete. So I would caution that we don't move on till we finish what we've started, and learn from that, and then bring that experience into the new development piece. But it's also, for me, basically around, we need to concentrate more on human rights. We need to concentrate more on the rights of the individual to self-determine their own lives, and not for us to be so concerned with compliance or with seclusion or all of the tools that we use within mental health services at times, is that we should be more about enabling people to become more self-reliant for themselves, and in many ways we be there to support them to do that.
We believe that our mental health is supported by a system of care that starts in the community. Our knowledge around mental health doesn't necessarily match. There are some similar ways we talk about mental health from Indigenous perspective as from a traditional mainstream or a Western perspective. As that really drives more of a principle-based approach, because we actually still share a lot of similarities. So we talked about a number of principles, and I wanted to touch on a few of them. One of them that we know from what works in our communities and in our systems of care for mental health. And one of them is on one hand really simple, but it's actually really hard to pull off, is the concept of being connected. From a mental health perspective, that we have no more silos between mental health and addictions, or psychiatric clinical care and paraprofessional, that we actually all work together in the best interest of the client or the consumer. So that's a key principle for us, because so often there are silos or there are differences of opinion, and that actually gets in the way of the best care for the people we serve. The other one I just wanted to mention quickly, of all the principles I talked about, but there are really two key ones. The other one is cultural competence. So in an ideal system, mental health for Indigenous first starts in the Indigenous community, served by Indigenous organizations, Indigenous services. But we can't do this on our own, so we do rely on the partnership with mainstream. But we also require and request that mainstream services are culturally competent. So when we talk about cultural competence, we're talking about knowledge of Indigenous peoples in the land, that history of colonization, the potential impacts, where they are right now in terms of their well-being, where they want to go. It is their decision and self-determination. Cultural competence is then second around self-awareness. We all bring our own culture into the room, just like a fish in water. It's very hard to acknowledge one's own culture because it colors and supports all of our viewpoints in the world. So how can we challenge ourselves to think more about our own culture and be aware of it so that we can learn from others? Because the more aware we are of our own, it just opens us up to the potential of learning from others. We also define cultural competence as a skill. It cannot stay solely as knowledge, it cannot stay solely as self-awareness. It leads to effective relationships across cultures. So those are a couple of the principles that we think are incredibly important as we move forward.